Hello and welcome back to Swan Signal Live, Sats fans. I'm Brady Swenson, your host. This is episode 74. We were expecting Simon Dixon, but he had some last minute changes to his schedule. So we'll be here one-on-one with Mauricio from Ledn. I'm excited to talk. There's tons to talk about. Excited to get his takes on everything that's going on and hear the latest updates from Ledn and the new Bitcoin mortgage product that they have released, and much more. Before we dive in, a quick word about an awesome new product that we launched last week at Swan. It's called the Bitcoin Canon. This is an educational product that we hope will help you and your friends and family learn about Bitcoin. Our mission at Swan, of course, is to create 10 million new Bitcoiners, and not just people who are holding Bitcoin, but people who understand what's going on. And we believe that education is the key to this mission. So over the years, we've seen educational resources in the Bitcoin space grow rapidly in both quality and quantity. And we now want to help you sort of pick the signal from the noise as these contributions continue to come in from all over the world in the Bitcoin space. So the Canon presents curated collections, thematic collections of Bitcoin educational content that's curated by Bitcoiners that you know, like Lynn Alden, Matt Odell, Alan Farrington. And this is just the beginning for the Canon. We are going to build it out, add new features, and we have big plans for the Bitcoin Canon. We want to make it one of the best educational resources in the space and leverage all the great content that's already out there, but add a level of curation that will make it easier to find and to understand for Bitcoiners out there. All right, so let's dive in with Mauricio. How's it going, man? Welcome to Swan Signal Live.
Thanks, Brady. Glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad that you're here too. Sorry that Simon couldn't make it, but this is a good opportunity just for the two of us to chat, and I'm looking forward to it. So there's tons to talk about, of course, but you are in Canada, so I thought we'd start with that, and we'll get to Russia here in a little bit. But Ledn is a Bitcoin business based in Canada. Obviously, there's been a lot happening around the financial institutions and sort of what amounts to, I would say, domestic financial sanctions against Canadians. And so, what is it like for you personally and for Ledn as a business to be operating in Canada right now with this sort of uncertainty about the future? New concerns that might have arisen for you and your business.
Yeah, so maybe it's a great question, Brady, and I think something that naturally people are interested in hearing about. So first, I'll start with the sort of business aspect of it, the implications, practically speaking. So I guess let's start with what happened, and what happened. We can separate it into practically the measures that were taken, and then we can get into the whole set of politics behind it, which is a whole separate conversation. But practically speaking, what happened was that there was a set of protests in Canada, and the government of Canada enacted what's called an Emergencies Act, which gave the government essentially the power to identify and update the list of suspicious individuals or suspicious addresses, in the case of Bitcoin addresses, so that essentially they could take measures so that the banks could hold their assets. Now, I'll start by saying that the Emergencies Act has been lifted. It's no longer active. And what ended up, the outcome of the measures was that there was only a finite number. I believe it was less than 200 people that were added to the list. And my understanding is that most of those accounts are being unfrozen right now, one by one. But what that did was essentially, practically speaking, what happened was that the government of Canada updates its list of suspicious people or suspicious addresses. And this is a list that gets updated through a government entity called FinTrack, which is the equivalent of FinCEN in the United States. And basically all regulated centralized exchanges have to abide by these FinTrack and FinCEN lists. And so effectively what happens was that these lists got updated, and exchanges then had to update their lists to make sure that none of their clients were impacted by these measures. So as of today, no Ledn clients were impacted by these measures. I want to be clear about that. And while it has created sort of big waves in the media, the practical impact to essentially all of our clients, and my understanding to like the sort of overall majority of Canadians, has been limited to those people that were identified. Now, that is on a sort of practical level. on a personal level and on a political level, we can, there's a whole conversation to be had about how these powers were enacted, why these powers were enacted, how many kind of checks and balances there are in the government to enact and remove these powers. That's a very I think important conversation. But the first thing I wanted to do was sort of address the practical implications, which are can be perceived to be disconnected from the big media wave that's been going on. And so again, there's a whole very big conversation to be had about the politics and what this sort of means going forward. But I think practically speaking, I wanted to be very clear that the impact was kind of how exchanges in general had to react to the situation.
Yeah, that's a great summary of what's going on, and thank you for the take on what this means for Ledn and other Bitcoin businesses. So, I mean, there was an effort to donate Bitcoin to these people who were exercising their right at civil disobedience, and I think they accumulated like $1 million basically worth of Bitcoin that was given, and it was distributed. And I've been watching, Nobody Caribou is his handle on Twitter, who kind of led the effort to distribute it, and we saw the Canadian government identify a set of Bitcoin addresses to be blacklisted by Bitcoin exchanges who are operating in Canada. And what do you think about Bitcoin's sort of promise to be able to get around these kinds of financial sanctions against individuals and nations, et cetera, and what we saw go down with these donations? Obviously, I just want you to get to comment on what this means for Bitcoin and that promise, and maybe where we go from here. I know that as a business person in Canada, you've got to be careful here, given what happened with Jesse Powell and Brian Armstrong. I don't want to put you in that position, but just as the network as a whole, and that promise that maybe partially failed some people.
So it's a great point, Brady. But I think the important distinction to make is that I think the main important the important thing to highlight here is education in the sense that I don't think that Bitcoin's promise is functionally broken. I think if you look at what's happening, I lived through Bitcoin's promise in Venezuela, right? I saw an authoritarian government, and again, in very different scales, when an authoritarian government tries to unfairly punish its people and try to limit their ability to transact and protect their wealth, people find a way. And I do not believe that this means that Bitcoin's promise is broken. I think what this means is that we need to continue educating people about how they can use Bitcoin and what are the most effective ways to use Bitcoin. And the fact that there is more than one way to hold your Bitcoin, and different options can give you different trade-offs, right? And so in a place like like the Ukraine or Venezuela or Colombia, a personal incentives to hold Bitcoin one way or another can shift, say, relative to a place like the United States and Canada. And one thing that I just want to highlight on a personal note, right? Which I think is something that we as Bitcoiners need to be very aware of, is that we cannot. So I say this because I saw what happened. I'm speaking kind of from what happened in Venezuela. When things start turning challenging, right? There's the option of you to opt in to try to fix and change the system, and then there's the option for you to opt out and essentially, remove yourself from the system and go to greener pastures. I am a product of a group of people that was forced to opt out of their country. And while it is sad to see what is happening in Canada, the real scale of authoritarianism gets really, really dark really fast. And I'm talking about radio stations getting shut down, TV stations getting shut down, properties getting expropriated left, right, and center. And I'm not saying that we don't see glimpses of this with the Emergencies Act, but all I'm saying is that in a people that need Bitcoin and that continue to need Bitcoin still have a way to use it and to get exactly what they need out of Bitcoin. So I do not think the promise that Bitcoin has made, or the promise that we all see in Bitcoin, has changed or is broken. I just think we need to adjust to new information, and we need to continue educating people, which is something you guys at Swan do really well, and we pride ourselves at Ledn as well. But I think that is to me, the biggest takeaway from this is that we continue to need more education.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible take. I mean, education is important on so many levels, and I know that Ledn is committed to it too. And it's money, and it's a new technology, and both of those things make people nervous: new money and a new technology. And so it's kind of a chasm, for people who are coming into the space to expect them in mass. We have sort of this small group of advocates who have listened to 10,000 hours of content on Reddit and watched and all of that. That's not going to happen, obviously, at scale. So creating education that's easily digested is incredibly important on that front as well. Do you think that this is sort of the first step or opening salvo of governments attempting to ban self-custody? Like, they want to be able to kind of capture Bitcoin to be able to control it more?
So if I look at what happened in Venezuela, right, and I kind of give you, because the reason I keep going back to that is I think we, I equate the fiat system as a set of dominoes, and there's the reserve dominoes that sit at the reserve end of the curve, US, Canada, Europe, which have never even shaken. You're starting to see them shake for the first time now. But then there's like the dominoes that are further on the end of the curve, which have fallen many times over, like ours. Venezuela has removed, and this is not a joke, 13 zeros from its currency while I've been alive.
That's incredible.
That's while I've been alive only. Okay, so I had a pinned tweet on my account that I removed it after a while, but it said, "Bad money never dies; it just resets." So I've seen a money like the Bolivar has had a million reasons to die, but yet it hasn't. All right, and it doesn't because they have the monopoly on violence at the end of the day that just forces everybody to continue using it. Right. As citizens and constituents start opting out of their money because they understand and start losing faith in their government, inflation starts rising, and the government starts trying to push back against it, right? Yeah. And so they do that in different ways. They do that by trying to restrict the amount of properties you can buy, or the amount of dollars you can buy, or the amount of hard assets that you can purchase, right? And so they start trying to restrict you in that way. I don't, will governments continue down this trend? I think that's inevitable. Like, governments all over the world will continue to just try to, guide their, try to get their agenda through. And, there might be people that stand in the way and then start trying to opt out of their currency. And they're going to try to contain that in some ways. They're going to try to contain that by either limiting the price of dollars, fixing the price of dollars, like in China. I don't know if anybody listening has ever tried to buy or sell a US dollar in China, but it's very difficult, right? And there are countries that put these little, barriers and boundaries so they can contain their exchange rate. I think this is a trend that will likely continue as this sort of tug of war between fiats, continues to happen, continues to unfold.
Yeah.
But I think it's a game of ebbing and flowing, right? Because the second you start tightening too much, there's very little friction right now to move your assets all over the world, especially with Bitcoin, right? So the second you start tightening things too much, you'll start seeing some of these people say, okay, well, perhaps this is not the best place for my assets. Perhaps I'll take them here. And so what I think Bitcoin will do is it will eliminate the friction to move assets around the world into different jurisdictions. And eventually the end game of that is that you get governments then having to start competing to host you. Right. And so I think what that does is that it kind of flips it, because the way the governments have kind of, set their foot is by saying, no, we're not going to allow the movement of capital. We're going to basically put these boundaries here for you to bring it out and take it in, because that's how we contain our exchange rate. Right. But as Bitcoin eliminates the ability for governments to contain that flow of capital, it flips the game into now them saying, okay, the first governments that start understanding how this game has switched will benefit ultimately. And I think we're seeing some of that in El Salvador, right?
Yeah.
Like El Salvador is turning around and saying, wait a second, some guys here are trying to ban it. China did a horrible, I think, terrible policy decision and banned everything a few months
big
ago.
blunder, I think, will turn out to be.
Then no, it's not, because they're trying to prevent Chinese people from taking money out of the country. That's I think,
well, yeah, not a blunder for their purposes.
Correct. But it tells me at least that Bitcoin's doing its job. And so then you have what happened in Russia, right? Russia banned it 4 weeks ago. Within the same week, Putin came out saying, no, do not ban it. Like that is not a good idea. Again, to me, that says Bitcoin's doing its job, right? So going back to your first question about, is Bitcoin keeping its promise? Like at the world stage, I think yes, absolutely, no question in my mind. There are some isolated events. No, I don't say isolated events. There are some events that hit some people closer to home than others, right? And so naturally, North Americans are kind of saying, okay, look at what's happening in Canada. That could be me. They look like me. I have friends there. I can relate to that, right? And you feel it. You feel it, right? Similarly, I bet you that there are people in Ukraine right now that probably hadn't even thought about Bitcoin until what happened this morning. And they're going to wake up and say, wow, like they don't really think about what happened in Ottawa. They look at what happened to them and how Bitcoin helps that context.
Right.
And so again, at the world stage, these eye-opening events on why we need Bitcoin continue to happen around us. There's just some that hit closer to home than others.
Yeah. I've been sort of rethinking my take on how this will play out geopolitically. I have, had hope that, and I still have, I'm just trying to kind of rethink things given some recent developments, that Bitcoin might be accepted in the United States by, leadership, lawmakers, et cetera, and seen in many ways similar to the internet, which was, look, this is a big opportunity. We want to embrace it here, not overregulate it, so that we can build an industry that's kind of based here. And now the biggest companies in the world are built on top of the internet and are based here in the United States. And then maybe we could, sort of go and argue in this way for Bitcoin to be embraced and, not overregulated, but, embraced by the government and regulated in some way. If this geopolitical game kind of plays out to sense that there's this side that has created the a dollar CBDC or a euro CBDC, and the Western world sort of unites behind this path, which has a lot of positives for the goals of these governments, and for instance, they may see it as a way to more successfully or enforce sanctions, for instance, right? If they had more tight control over the money and the financial system that CBDC would allow, then they could have execute these sanctions in an even more successful way. So if then, like, these historic enemies of the West continue to embrace Bitcoin as a option, like a opposition against a Western CBDC system, I don't see that happening in the U.S. and the West, that this embracement of Bitcoin. So it's interesting. The game theory may play out where things are really uncomfortable for Bitcoiners in the Western world, and the pro-Bitcoin coalition of nations is outside the West. Any thoughts on that?
It's a good question. I'll kind of give you, I'll try to parse it out in different ways. But one point that I'll make is that there's a large number of, I believe the United States, if I remember correctly, holds about a quarter of the world's GDP. And if you ask, say, a wealthy person in Venezuela, perhaps even a wealthy person in Russia, perhaps a wealthy person in Colombia, where they hold their wealth, they will answer many times in a US bank, or they hold US property, or they have equity in the US markets. What I see Bitcoin as a vehicle so that people can express where they want to be invested, right? For instance, in a person in a country like Ukraine right now, their financial options are very limited as to where they can probably send and receive and even send money to their friends, or even somebody here in Canada or the US that wanted to send some money to somebody in the Ukraine would likely right now be told not to send those funds to a bank account or through, say, Western Union or any other sort of normal means, because everything is compromised, nothing is arriving. And so I think you can still make the case that that person will potentially have to use Bitcoin to get it there. But the flip side is also true, in that if you are a person that you were in Ukraine and you saw right now that there was a big problem brewing, and you thought that your banks could be compromised, or you thought that that your ability to sell your assets could be compromised, a lot of those people could have gone to Bitcoin. And I actually saw a lot of Venezuelans, as Venezuela was going down a path of just horrible dictatorship. Many Venezuelans basically took their assets, liquidated them in Venezuela, and essentially sold them off for the dollar to Bitcoin so that they could leave the country. And I just don't think that I think Bitcoin is equivalent to it's a way of expressing financial freedom. And if you ask people around the world where they think they could best express their financial freedom, they'll tell you that that market is the United States. And so I see both stablecoins and Bitcoin as almost tools that are, at the end of the day, beneficial for the United States, because the more you allow people in the Ukraine to take their place to take their assets to a place where they feel safe, the more countries like the United States and Canada will win, because we have that brand of security and safety. And imperfect as our governments may be, they are a lot more stable than everywhere else, just from what we've seen historically. So I do I do think governments are trending into a path of more norms, more regulations, more rules. But I also think that we don't operate in a vacuum, right? Like as the United States is doing things, or the Canada are doing things that people don't like, look outside, look at the CBDC plans that China has, and tell me if those are not a little more draconian. And so it's not necessarily like, people used to say when Libra came out, and people were talking about the Facebook stablecoin and Libra, and I was, I actually have always been excited about stablecoins personally. I think they're a very useful tool to onboard people around the world into Bitcoin. But there were people at the time that said, why would you want Mark Zuckerberg governing your money? And I'm like, have you ever actually, tried to go ask a person in Venezuela and say, hey, would you like the dictatorship regime to have control of all your bank accounts, or would you feel safer if you had them on a Facebook account, and Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook are going to be able to see what you'd have? Most people will be totally fine with that. In Venezuela, they'll be like, please do, like, please take it away, give it to Zuckerberg. And so it's not always about the absolute good or bad of the options. Is about your relative improvement against your base case, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes great sense. That's a good answer. I like I said, I still maintain that hope, but it was kind of trying to steelman against that kind of what became an assumption for me. And I could see kind of going both ways, but I think it's more likely to end up being embraced in the West as a technology that's important sort of alongside, at least at first, until the Trojan horse empties that, alongside a CBDC system. So you said that you're from Venezuela, you came to Canada. Why a Bitcoin-backed loan service? Like, why build Ledn, and what inspired you coming from Venezuela to provide that service instead of other? There are at least several other kind of viable Bitcoin financial services that you could have provided.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Actually, I really enjoy answering it. There's a couple of things that ended, and I can't take full credit. Like, co-founder, my best friend and co-founder Adam Reitz, we founded the business together. But the way that came to be, we'll give you kind of the summary. Growing up in Venezuela, I saw a lot of people make a lot of money by borrowing bolivares that were hyperinflationary, and they would just turn around and buy dollars with them. And literally they would wait inflation to do its thing. Because and the reason they could do that is because when money is dying, no surprise to you or anyone here, the government fixes its interest rates
Right.
so that it makes it look as if things aren't too bad. And so we had very negative real rates of interest. We were able to borrow from the bank at 20% when inflation was 100%. Right now, overnight rate is quarter base point, and the inflation rate is 7.51% or 7.53%. So again, we're getting paid to borrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I saw there was this this almost like this wealth perpetuating wheel where you could borrow a weak asset to buy a hard asset with it, and then just let time do its thing, right? And I became very fascinated by that concept from the early days, and that triggered for me what was a bit of a fascination for how money worked, because I could never understand how the Venezuelan government, not collecting taxes and being the worst money manager in the planet, could still stick around. And then eventually, you dawn on the fact that, oh, they just print it, right? And then
Right.
once you get into that, you just want to keep peeling more and more layers on the onion. So that's why I came to Canada and did my finance degree and my master's degree, and that's where I met Adam. After that, I graduated and went back to Venezuela. I was back and forth between Venezuela and Canada, and this was around between 2010 to 2014. And the reason that was is, even though the country was falling apart, Chavez was still alive, oil was booming, and Venezuela had this like mirage of a booming economy because Chavez just kept taking all the oil money and just dumping it back. And
Right.
so my family was a very entrepreneurial family. My dad always wanted to keep the family together, so he kept asking me to go back and do kind of entrepreneurial projects with him. I went every time I came, I did something. I kept seeing how Venezuela was the path that it was going, and I just kind of shook my head and decided to go back to Canada. So I did that dance for a little bit. But eventually, when Chavez dies, and we have that big election where we think we're all going to regain our democracy
Right.
and return back to greatness, and the Communist Party just completely steals that election in our face. And at the time, funny enough, I was so convinced that we were going to win that I had actually sold all of my assets in Canada. I put everything in a container and shipped it right back, and I was ready to
Wow.
restart my life.
Wow.
And we lose the election. The container arrives, and I was just like, my now wife was like, we can't do this. We can't stay here. And so with all the pain, you can imagine, all that pain, kind of putting all your belongings into like a storage room again,
Yeah.
knowing you're not going to touch them. And we just got on a plane right back. And,
Wow.
and I just tried to kind of forget about Venezuela for a little bit because it was hard. But
Heartbroken.
my family didn't want to leave, which was the hardest part. They all wanted to stay, especially my youngest brother, who was just graduating university. And we are an entrepreneurial family. Every time we graduated, my dad gave us a little angel check so we could go take a crack. And I had done it. My middle brother had done it, and it was now my youngest brother's turn. But the country was in shambles. Like there was nothing to be done. He kept putting up these like very eager projects, and we were like, man, this is just gonna, might as well throw the money down the drain. And he was like, he was getting a little bit frustrated. There was months had gone by, and we just rejecting everything. What we really wanted him was to leave the country, but he didn't want to. So
Yeah.
he sends us this sort of final offer about this project, and it's either this or I'm done, and I'm selling everything and I'm leaving. And it was this machines that would mine this thing called Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so my dad sends me the white paper, and I'm in Canada at the time. I start reading the white paper. It says your brother wants to buy these computers. They want to mine this thing called Bitcoin. And I'm not gonna lie, like the first time I read the white paper, I wasn't like a lot of people were like, oh, I read the white paper, it was so clear to me. And
Yeah.
I read the white paper and I was like, okay, like I think I get it. Like this sounds pretty interesting, but very new. Like I started looking at it from the mining side, and the mining side I got pretty comfortable understanding that there were these very complicated chips. They were the first ASICs, and for Bitmain, I think it was S5s, or like second generation ASICs or something, and they consumed a lot of energy, and that was heavily subsidized in Venezuela. So the inputs were machine, a lot of energy, and an
Yeah.
internet connection.
Yeah.
And two of those inputs were heavily subsidized in Venezuela. And the output was a book that had a global market that you could sell in dollars. And so to me, it was, out of the stuff that he had pitched, it was just the best because it was isolated. The Venezuela risk was very mitigated in that prop. So we greenlit it. I said, Dad, this makes sense. Let's, let him, for me, it's, I'm good. And so my dad greenlights him. He starts buying. I think he buys like 5 machines. And this was, I believe, midway through 2014. And I fly back for Christmas that year. Like a few months had gone by. And in a country where everybody's liquidating their assets and looking at places to go, my brother is now asking their people, like, "Oh, are you closing down your factory? Can I rent your facility?" And it smiles ear to ear, him and his buddies. Well, all of my friends are like depressed, asking you, "Are you going to Peru? Are you going to Argentina? Like, where are you moving?" And my brother's like, "I'm not going anywhere." It's like I'm ecstatic. And so I asked him, I'm like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm mining Bitcoin." And I said, "Show me." And so he takes me to his mine. He had like a bunch of ASICs in this little room, and he had a little laptop. And he says, and he's he had a lot more computers than we had bought originally. So I was like, "Where did you get these computers?" He's like, "I bought them. I just reinvested in my mine." And I'm like, "Nah." I'm like, "My dad just gave you more money." He's like, "No, man, I paid him back."
Wow.
I later confirmed with my dad that he did in fact had paid him back. And I went back to him and I said, "Just show me what you're doing." He's like, "How much money do you want me to send you to your bank account?" I'm like, "Just send me like $200 or like $100." And he's like, "Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send this Bitcoin right here from this wallet into this exchange." It was called Serve Bitcoin, and it was serving Venezuela at the time. And it was great. Those guys have since unfortunately been arrested and done a bunch of, because Venezuela, anyway, we can get into that.
Yeah. Yikes.
But at the time, within an hour, the money hits my account.
Okay.
And at that moment, that is when all the light bulbs went off. When I saw him convert this asset that arrived into this wallet through an exchange into real money, into my Venezuelan bank account, in the most challenged financial system I have ever been in, I understood the potential, and it blew my mind. And then from that moment on, I could not stop thinking about Bitcoin. And then I started mining, and then I started learning how to mine. I started trying to build my own GPU rig to mine other things, just to get a better understanding on how mining and the ecosystem worked. And I couldn't really build an ASIC, so I just had to go build a GPU rig just to kind of understand the pieces. And so when I started doing that, I understood, and I became very convinced that Bitcoin was an asset that was going to be a great reserve asset, and digital gold and many other things. And in addition to being open and permissionless and available to everyone in the world, it was just a mine. I probably don't need to preach to everyone listening to this, because that was just we got convinced. I got convinced.
Yeah, those moments are special. Everybody's got theirs.
To me, the most overwhelming reaction to that is like, anybody that has a Bitcoin will not want to sell it. They will want to continue accumulating their Bitcoin. And I saw this started happening with people, with miners in Venezuela, and people that have started doing really well. They started accumulating all this Bitcoin, but all they wanted to do was mine more, get more Bitcoin, grow their Bitcoin even more. And the only way at the time to buy more miners was to pay Bitmain in Bitcoin. And you essentially had to reinvest your Bitcoin. Bitmain had, I believe it was 6 to 9 month delivery timelines under ASIC. So you were essentially prepaying at today's Bitcoin price, and you were getting an ASIC delivered at 1 year out Bitcoin price. The opportunity cost of that was tremendous. People should be happy when they were receiving their ASICs. They were crying. They were like, if I had just held my Bitcoin, like all I really needed was just a loan against that Bitcoin. Like that's all I really wanted, to just grow my mind. And it would have been a much better decision. So to me, that started illuminating the need for it. When I came to Canada, I didn't have, after that trip with my brother, like when all my light bulbs went on, I was in Canada with my now wife. So
and what year is this?
This is Christmas 2014, 2015. So it's like early 2015 coming back.
Okay.
And so I didn't really have free power or the free internet, and the facilities were very expensive. I was in a very different market in Canada, so I started really trying to read content, write content, build my own ASICs, slowly start buying machines so I could host them in like my friends' facilities and such, and really start learning. And then there was a point in time at around early 2017, late 2016, early 2017, I start basically pitching my best friend Adam, my Canadian friend Adam. Essentially, I tell him, Adam, like, we need to get into Bitcoin. Like, what I know how to do really well is mine. By that point, I had helped a bunch of people build their mines. My brothers were on like their 7 or 8 mines, and like, my whole family was mining, so we were really kind of into the sort of electrical upgrades, networking, all the stuff that needed to go into it. And so I started trying to convince Adam to create a sort of mining facility here in Canada, because Canada has very cheap power. I don't know if you remember back in the 2017 rally, all the big facilities were trying to get set up here in Quebec. And so we thought that could be an interesting opportunity. But as we started building that mine, we built our mine and it started going great. Now we wanted to grow it, and we wanted to grow it by getting a loan. And nobody would give us a loan. And there was one company that was doing it at the time, and they had done a big ICO. And to borrow, you had to like, stake tokens, and the interest, you had to pay the interest in token. It was just this very complex and thing. And we both came from traditional finance. And so if you're in the lending business, you have to get to the cheapest cost of capital. And those institutions are heavily regulated institutions. So if you want to get to the top of that mountain, in our view was that we needed to, try to climb the same mountain wearing kind of like similar gear, so that we could then interact with that cost of capital and win that end game. Because if you kind of went in a rail that just kind of fell outside their cookie cutter, then they were just going to have a lot of challenges trying to wrap their heads around that business model. So in that, we saw a pretty big opportunity. And we said, if we can do, Canada's first Bitcoin-backed loan, we're going to be in a really good position, because not only will Canadians need this, until Bitcoin, and I know this might be, it's not really news to many, but until Bitcoin, if you were a person in, let's just say, I don't know, Italy, and you wanted to borrow from a Canadian lender, there was no real collateral that Canadian lender could take to get comfort into lending you those assets or those funds while you were in Italy.
Sure.
Bitcoin changes that completely. At Ledn, we service a Canadian client as fast as we service a Colombian client or a Mexican client, and they get the same rates and the same treatment. And we thought that if we nailed this model in Canada, we could very quickly then expand this offering to the rest of the world. And with time, we thought that this company, and this kind of ties back to the first part of our conversation, being a Canadian company was very much by design, because I believe coming from Venezuela, that yes, even though governments around the world are sort of are deteriorating, these beacons of freedom, the United States, Canada, we're going to be the ones that we're going to deteriorate at the slowest rate, if you want to say it in a different way, right?
Yeah.
And that thesis has in many ways proven to be true. Until what happened recently, Canada has been a safe haven for people's assets. Even if you go back to the last financial crisis, Canadian banks were shining because of how well behaved they were during the whole thing. And so Canada has this nice guy, friendly country, open, minded. And so that's why, personally, to me, it's such a juxtaposition, or such a contrast to see what's happening now. And I actually,
a lot of people.
And that's why I think most people are like, "Whoa, Canada!" Like, we're the nice guys. There's never a fight. There's very rarely a protest. And
the Canadian, I mean, that protest, or I don't even want to call it a protest. Civil disobedience to me, because it was civil. It was extremely calm and kind, and so it was, in my mind, it was very Canadian. That reputation is well earned, and I have a lot of friends who have emigrated from their countries to Canada. I mean, it's a very welcoming country in that regard.
Yeah, and listen, like I do have faith, and I do believe that we will be able to overcome this. Like Canada will be able to overcome this. That we will be able to get to the bottom of what happened, and put whatever measures have to be put in place so that this doesn't happen again, right? And if you look back at what happened in the United States, right, like we had a few years back when we had that election, there was a bunch of big drama, people coming into and I don't think that Canada and the United States are built on this premise that there will never be issues. I think that Canada and the United States are built on the premise that they know that they can bounce back and that their people can rebuild. Because it's not about whether there's going to be issues or not. There will be issues. Like, things will happen. It's about the ability for a society to crawl back out of whatever hole they were in, and to not. And that's my fear on this whole viralization of the opt-out movement, because if enough of us opt out, the rules are going to be made by those who opted in,
right?
and that, if you're not having a say on that, trust me, you're not going to like what comes out of that box. And so, like, I already kind of saw a country get lost to this opting out process, because politics is, people always want to leave politics to someone else. Let someone else deal with it. I'm too good for that. Those guys are crooks. Those guys are this. But when you leave it to the crooks, that's the output you will get, right? And so I almost, I almost like champion against this idea that politics are a different group. We're against this concept of we and us and them. They're different. They are making the rules that we have to follow. Like, we should not consider them this alien group of people that have all these almighty powers. Like, we give them those powers, right? And as the countries get bigger, it's hard to coordinate the masses. It's easier to confuse. But I think we need to be smarter than that, and just come together and fix it.
Yeah, I agree with you on the resilience of the governments of the United States and in Canada compared to other types of governments. I think it's the United States government in particular has been through many extremely difficult times, including a civil war and the civil rights movement and all Vietnam, and deep disagreements, fundamental disagreements about the way the country should be run. And it's survived through all of those. And I think you're right. It's Lindy at this point, and will survive through what's going on right now. So yeah, I think that there's some hope there, and there's some work being done. The Bitcoin Today Coalition, the SAT Center just launched, kind of as an answer to the Coin Center, a Bitcoin only lobby for the U.S. government and political organization. So there's, I think, 40 companies that are a part of the SAT Center, and those kinds of efforts, I think, are organizing now. And obviously, there's a lot of politicians that are seeing benefits of embracing Bitcoin on both sides of the aisle. So we're seeing the beginnings of the political system being, kind of resilient in terms of against opposition to Bitcoin. So yeah, I wanted to dive in. Okay, so we got the story about the how you decided to launch Ledn and the Bitcoin-backed loan product, which must be doing very well, and your father must be very proud of you, because you just raised $70 million on a $540 million valuation, which is incredible. Congratulations on that. At the same time, or soon after, you launched the mortgage product. So I'm seeing, in my mind, this is the Bitcoin sort of world and system sort of meshing with the legacy system, and what probably is required for this sort of like phase where we might transition into a Bitcoin-based economy. So do you see, like, first of all, tell me a little bit about the mortgage product, and then what's is this just like you're basically going to kind of replicate all of these consumer financial products and integrate Bitcoin?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So what many companies would probably tell you this, but we try to stick very true to this. So we build based on what our clients want and what our clients tell us, and the actions that essentially we see our clients doing, the insights that we can get from the actions that they do on our platform. So just to kind of give you a bit of history on how some of our products have evolved. So our first product was our Bitcoin backed loan. That's our flagship product, still what many people know us for. And that is a product that lets you place Bitcoin as collateral, get dollars, so that you don't have to sell your Bitcoin. So when we first launched the product, we saw that about, I would say 40% of the people in the first few months of the product were using the loan, placing their Bitcoin as collateral, getting dollars, taking those dollars to a different exchange, buying Bitcoin with it, bringing that Bitcoin back, getting another loan, taking dollars, using those dollars to buy more Bitcoin. And they were doing this over and over until they got to the max amount or the minimum loan size. And that was, we said, okay, well, if clients are really excited about borrowing against their Bitcoin to buy more Bitcoin, can we make this process quicker and easier for them? And we created this loan product called B2X. So at Ledn now, if you bring, say 1 Bitcoin and you want to do a B2X, you just do 3 clicks and Ledn lends you the dollars needed to buy an equal amount of Bitcoin. So then you get 2 Bitcoin, those stay as collateral with Ledn until you repay the loan. And that is a very popular product today for us, again, because we just productize a use case of what our clients were doing with the loan. Similarly, last year, we started seeing some of our clients basically come to us and say, guys, I want to buy a property. I want to buy real estate here in Canada. The bank won't give me the mortgage that I want. The bank thinks that, in the eyes of the bank, I have no money because I have, millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, but to them, it's worthless. And so what I would like to do is essentially take a Bitcoin-backed loan to buy this house. And they started taking out these massive Bitcoin-backed loans to buy properties. And then they were then trying to refinance those properties through any kind of bank they could and see if they could pay down a portion of that loan. But many times they couldn't even get the mortgage, any kind of financing. So then they came back to us and they said, listen, guys, I already only use you guys. I want to not use my bank for anything. Can you please, work with me so that I can put my property as collateral for my loan, and therefore, that will let me buy this house using my Bitcoin wealth. And when we started seeing more and more clients ask us about this, we started seeing actually pretty interesting opportunities to create a very unique product and a product that would, in some ways enhance the experience relative to the standard offering. And the reason I say that is because we can solve a few problems by combining Bitcoin and real estate as collateral. One, we give the Bitcoiner access to the house of their dreams because we qualify them on their wealth and their digital asset wealth, and not necessarily what the bank will qualify as wealth. And so in that sense, we let the Bitcoiner do one more thing with their Bitcoin, and they need to use half of the Bitcoin that they initially would have through the standard program, right? Because in the standard program, they would have needed to put $2 million worth of Bitcoin to get $1 million worth of loan. In this case, they put $1 million worth of Bitcoin and a house worth $1 million to get the same loan. So the amount of Bitcoin they have to place as collateral to get the house is reduced by half. The other benefit is that by putting real estate as part of that collateral, it makes the collateral pool a lot more stable. And so we can give the client more generous timelines to essentially top up or send more Bitcoin if and when the price moves. And so that is those two things were very palatable for our clients. And when we basically started working with our clients to say, hey, listen, we can develop a product for you. Let's try to essentially structure this in a way that will work for you and for us. And when we landed on a structure, we announced the waitlist in mid-December. We've received thousands and thousands of inquiries, and the response has been really, really incredible. Right now, we're putting the last touches on the product, and we're going to start the outreach imminently for our Canadian clients at first.
That's really exciting, man. Yeah, congratulations, absolutely. And it's I'm excited for Ledn, but I'm excited for the Bitcoin industry as a whole, as these products are finding a market and demand out there, and that's extremely promising. And of course, will only grow over time as more and more Bitcoiners are accumulating and looking to hold on to that Bitcoin. The tax policies are really good advertisement for these products, and I don't think they're going to change anytime soon. So let's see. I think we're going to head over to Spaces here in just a little bit. So thanks to everybody who's listening on Spaces right now. Mauricio, you have time for that still, Mauricio?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so we're going to head over to Spaces here in just a little bit. So be thinking of some questions that may have come up based on what we discussed here, or something completely different. For Mauricio, there's lots to discuss, of course, and follow up on. So I hope that there's some good questions waiting for us when we get over there in a few minutes. So I wanted to ask you a quick question about predictions for 2022, because you made some predictions, which I went through and were great, I think. But a lot's happened in the past 2 months, and I wonder if how these events may have impacted your expectations. Which just to kind of run them down real quick. So there's the bond issuance in El Salvador. Obviously, it's going to happen, but that might be followed on by other countries, more corporations announcing bond issuances like MicroStrategy, North America becoming the epicenter of the Bitcoin mining industry. Bitcoin financial services like loans, savings, and mortgages continue to grow in popularity. And finally, institutions will continue pouring into Bitcoin, insurance companies, endowments, pension funds, etc., looking to find some way to fix their kind of chronic underfunding. I guess you could put it.
Yeah. So, there's so many. There's a lot of things that have happened early on in this year, right? Like we have, there's a lot of things that are happening in the crypto industry. There's geopolitical, there's macro. We have an impending potential executive order to regulate crypto that could be coming anytime soon. So just speaking to the geopolitical conflicts, I think one of the things that we can see coming out of that is that, and it might not be entirely unrelated, right? Is that we were about to head into a monetary tightening process, and it just so happens, if you look back in history, that every time that the Fed tries to raise rates for the last 40 years, something magically occurs that derails the ability to raise rates, right?
Yeah, right.
And forces everybody down the path of more printing and easier or more accommodating policy, right? And so I'm seeing some glimpses of that. We have 2 weeks into a meeting, or 2 weeks into the next Fed meeting, where the world, according to the markets, is expecting 50 basis points. Given what just happens, I highly doubt that the Fed is looking at the U.S. economy saying, "Oh yeah, this can withstand 50 basis points, no problem." I'm not in the Fed's shoes, and I don't envy them. But to me, what I think could come out of this is the sort of we can move into tightening as fast as we needed or thought, and then let's just let the party go a little longer. And I think that accelerates some of the things that we were mentioning. So, for example, right now we're seeing it play out live. There's a flight to safety in the U.S. dollar. Everybody wants to be holding U.S. dollars right now. Canadian dollar selling off. The dollar index is higher. Everything's selling off against the dollar. So I think that's going to put the spotlight right back onto stablecoins. And people all over the world are now going to be wanting to get the stablecoins. And their banks are shaky. So it's like a perfect advertisement for stablecoins. Right now, how this, I think, impacts institutional appetite for Bitcoin is that, of course, nobody wants to buy into a risk asset in the middle of geopolitical tensions.
Right.
But I think once this, once we get some semblance of where the damage is and where it's going to sit, I think the realization is going to be, okay, things aren't going to get tighter. We're still in a negative real rates environment, getting paid to borrow. So go borrow and buy assets, right? And you're going to get into that trend may continue. So I think accelerated stablecoin adoption, perhaps delayed institutional purchases of Bitcoin. Like I think those two things could be a bit of a trade-off. In the other ones, I still think the El Salvador bond is coming. They're probably not going to have an easier time raising from traditional bond markets right now.
Right.
So I don't think that changes. And as far as the epicenter of Bitcoin mining, well, first there was China. You can bet that Russian miners are looking at Austin right now and like dreaming of relocating. Anybody that's doing any mining activity in the Ukraine, probably doing the same. So I think you continue to see this exodus of talent and Bitcoin into North America.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we'll leave it there and move over to Spaces. Thanks to Mauricio for hanging out with me, and we're heading your way, everyone over in the Twitter space right now. So get some questions ready. I'll wrap things up here and let Mauricio move over there, and I'll be there in just a minute. Okay, so that was it for today's first part of the broadcast here on Swan Signal Live. Do check out the Bitcoin Canon. It's our educational product that just launched last week. It's in its very early stages. Right now, you can find thematic collections of Bitcoin educational content curated by Bitcoiners such as Lynn Alden, Matt Odell, Alan Farrington, and many more. New rabbit holes are going to be dropping every week. So watch the Swan Twitter handle for threads on those new rabbit holes. We'll be hosting rabbit hole curators on our morning show, Cafe Bitcoin, which you can find in spaces every weekday morning, starting at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern. It's a fantastic show where there's a lot of discussion about the latest news at the top of the show. There's a great guest that joins in and gives commentary and takes analysis. And you might just find that someone like Max Kaiser or Lynn Alden drops into the space to hang out for a little while as well. So it's a lot of fun. Check out Cafe Bitcoin every weekday morning, and the Bitcoin Canon at swanbitcoin.com/canon. All right, I'll see you guys over in spaces.